Well, Surjan, thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Surjan Singh, Surge for short. Right now, I am the COO of Spira. We're like an algae company. Our team's really super about space and stuff. And so my own motivation actually for joining the company was like we were trying to figure out how to like talk about climate change and solve climate change. And I was really interested in cyanobacteria's ability to consume CO2 and displace it with oxygen. So we work with an photosynthetic organisms and stuff to do that. And I was like thinking, that'd be really cool for like engineering a planet. So I'm really interested in microbes and terraforming and that type of stuff. And then also generally like how do we, exist as a civilization or as humans in space. I'm really interested in that humanistic like conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you really think about what it takes to keep us alive and have the life that we have, it's
A
a
lot.
big, it's a big pyramid of stuff that we just can't take with us. We got to simplify.
Exactly. So it's I don't know, it's really fascinating to really think about some of this stuff because you start thinking about I'm plugged into a few different communities that talk about this kind of thing. Like I'm really interested in the seasetting community and their like whole conversation about how do we set up governments and how do government structures work in a new civilization. And like this is something that you need to think about when you talk about people. It's like, yeah, people have dynamics, and then in space you have extra responsibilities that you need to add on top of just being a person. I think that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of getting it wrong in space, leaving the front door open might be a nuisance here on Earth, but it could be instant death to everybody.
Gonna have bigger problems than those pesky murder hornets.
Indeed. Um, so what were some things that you were into before you came to Spera?
Yeah, so prior to that, I actually jumped into this company. I'm one of the co-founders right out of school. So I actually started doing this with my co-founder in school. And so I was actually a mechanical engineering student. So I'm already kind of really interested in different applications, different space stuff. One of my senior thesis projects was actually doing a project for NASA, trying to figure out climate mapping for Mars. And then like methods for climate mapping. And then, that's like data that you would have so that you would have target locations to like send people first. Like this is where we set up like colonies or set up a base for, astronauts or someone to like just do research and hang out. So for me, it was actually a lot of different things that I was really interested in. But I've learned a little bit that I lean in the startup direction a little bit because I like the commercial aspects of like solving a problem. It's like you solve a problem and someone's willing to pay you for it. That means it's a problem that's going to last, right? And so for me, I'm always interested in different types of problem solving. That's kind of the core driving force for me. Um, and I've, every now and then, like I'll sit down with a group of friends, we'll just like, even on like a Zoom call, and we'll just start talking about random stuff. And I'll just think about something. It's like, wait, here's the solution to this random problem that you just brought up, or something like that. And we start talking about that. So that's, I think, one of the core drivers with me and just in general. And then I think space is one of those interesting things because it's just like it's basically a series of endless problems, and that's a motivating factor for me because I'm like that's stressful, but I kind of love it.
And it's kind of interesting in terms of solving problems and people paying for them. There's sort of two sides to that. One is what are resources available in terms of solving the problem,
Yeah,
in terms of who's going to pay it and how much. And the other side of it is how much does it cost to solve the problem?
yeah,
And it seems like we get way more benefit out of reducing the cost than we do trying to increase the amount we're spending.
yeah. It's fascinating because it's like one of those things where, um, I actually like to key it into on the behavior, right? It's a behavior thing, right? I was actually talking to a few friends about this like about a week ago, and this like blew my mind when I was thinking about it. Is like you remember like I don't know 2010 when you like wanted to order some food or you wanted to like go somewhere, you like yeah, you find a way to do it, right? You either walk over to that place, like call a taxi or something, and then like 5 years ago, thereabouts, Uber and Lyft come along, and they fundamentally exactly how we do anything, right? It's that short period of time has fundamentally changed behavior, and the pricing model really is all about like the ability to make money. isn't really an indicator of necessarily a successful company. I actually think it's an indicator of there is a behavior that you are changing or a behavior that humans have accepted a change for. And I think that's really where the key thing is. It's not really about price. It's not really about selling something. It's really about what is that behavior and what does it take for people to change that behavior. Money, because it's like an intrinsic value that all of us kind of share, is like a good indicator of what that barrier is. But in like multiple different situations, when you're like working on a project or you're working on something, there's other ways where changing the behavior could come about. Like I don't know if you use something like Slack or you use something where it's like a messaging type of thing in like a project format. Like those are things that are behavior changing in terms of, oh, I feel like I'm getting a lot of benefit by communicating in this fashion versus traditional fashion.
Yeah, no, I know. Unfortunately, I use Slack, WhatsApp, Telegram, email, uh, and at time Messenger, and at times it's a little overwhelming. Honestly,
Yeah.
I need like a meta interface, you
I
know?
need one that does all of them.
Yes, I needed to kind of also get me the things that I absolutely need to respond to now, those that I could read later, but really need to make sure I read to, and yeah, I mean, I think there's an opportunity here.
Yeah, there's someone who's listening. Like create something that curates importance of messages. There's definitely a value there.
Right, and then just syncing up who's who on which platform too. Oh, and LinkedIn, it has its own messaging thing, and then Twitter.
Yeah, its own big thing. If you do anything with international supply chains, things like Alibaba and stuff also have their own messaging board. It's just like it's a lot of different things, and sometimes you just have to take hold of all of them. But like, yeah, kind of putting them together would be kind of it would be a blessing.
And on one hand, there should be like this common API, but on the other hand, these companies are disincentivized from kind of opening up their platform because they want to control the experience.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really interesting in that regard. Where there's like an interesting like bridge between like the way that you're curating your product and really your experience and versus like the goals you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes they're at odds with each other. And at other times you need to like other times they like completely mesh together and it's like fucking amazing. And it's like, oh man, that is really cool. But when it doesn't happen, sometimes you see it and then sometimes it's like this is still good enough that I'll still go for it, but I'm a little bit weirded out.
But you were talking about changing behavior and kind
Yeah,
of how things evolve over time. And I know one of the goals of Spira is actually to grow food
yeah,
using algae.
yeah,
And I mean, if you look at the way food is produced, 99% of it's produced very like I think you could take somebody from like 2,000 years ago, they'd be kind of mystified by some of the machines, but the underlying processes are the exact same processes that were used 2,000 years ago.
mhm,
I mean, we're still putting seeds in the ground, putting water on them, fertilizing them,
yeah.
and then waiting for them to grow and then harvesting them. When in reality, what we just need is a certain set of chemicals in particular forms that we ingest.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely. I mean, there's a few different ways to go about doing this. I think that one of the things that I have a deep respect for in terms of like NASA and their missions is when they try to add something, they also do studies on motivation and like does it help people? Like I mean, biased, of course, because I grow algae as a food company. But that's a really cool experience for like, oh, you're getting everything you need, or nearly everything you need, with just like a few scoops or something, or like really just a little bit of goop. But I think over a long period of time, that would be very demotivating. If you only ate algae for I don't know, maybe like 5 years, you'd probably be very tired of it at some point, right? And I think that's one of the core things that we really need to look into when it comes to this conversion of behavior. It's like, okay, what is the experience? And this goes back to what we just talked about with experience. What is the experience we're trying to replicate, and why is that experience important? I think algae is really important in that story, mainly because it's like a very efficient way to grow things. And like realistically, it's kind of the foundation of how things grow a little bit because without like chlorophyll or like anything that does photosynthesis, you don't really have anything else. And that mostly just comes from microalgae that then got consumed by other organisms. Like, we're going to take this and we're going to become plants. Um, so I think it's really it's really important to consider what is that experience and what is the goals of the experience itself. In the case of like astronauts, I think that there's some really interesting things that algae could do as its own in terms of nutrients, providing nutrients. But there's always going to be a need to do something more, like something tactile. Like, I know I love, like, one of my favorite snacks is like almonds and stuff like that, because I love that when I crush into it with my molars, I get that feeling of, was like, yeah, I just bit into something. And that's a very, very motivating factor for me. Sometimes I'll just like take a handful, eat them. Like, I feel a little bit more awake now. I can work for a little bit longer.
And indeed, but it's almost like you have like your core base material, and then you enrich it with different colorings and structures and other
Yeah.
things.
So there's definitely ways where we can go about like producing all the things that people need and then try to put it in a format that they can like eat or consume without, like, while really replicating the feeling that they're really looking for. Right. So that's I think the goals of cultured meat is like you can produce meats with very little resources by comparison, and you're basically producing the same base product. And in other things like fungi or even algae, might be able to do that with a little bit more modification. I mean, that's like, I think one of the greatest innovations from like something like Beyond and Impossible, right? It's not the fact that they're basically like, let's be honest, what they really created was a really, really technical veggie burger. It's basically what it is. It's a very technical veggie burger, but they put it into the format of like, what we want to target is people that enjoy meat. So they tried to simulate as close to it as possible. And I think that is like an amazing innovation when you're looking at motivation and behavior changes, right? Because it's trying to replicate something people already kind of have an understanding of. It might be slightly off, but it's close enough that the brain can kind of fill in the rest of the space and be like, this is good enough for me if this is really what I want to eat.
Of course, close enough versus distinctly different. When it comes to like robots that look like humans, right? If it's close enough but not right, it really feels freaky. But if it looks completely different, everybody's okay with that. I just wonder if
Yeah.
the same type of thing might happen with food.
Well, I think that's probably pretty true. I actually had like I think about a month ago, maybe a little bit less than that. There's that video from Boston Dynamics with the dancing robots.
Hmm.
That was cool. I definitely got a range of reactions from people when I showed it to them. Like, some people were like, "This is freaking me out a little bit," but for me, I was like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen." This is like, my engineer senses are going off. I'm like, this is awesome. This is like the best thing ever. And I think that's really the thing. It's more so. I mean, yes, you're going down that route of like, now that you're getting so close, it's a little bit freaky. But I think it's because we've always had that divide, and we've never really like put in the thought and the effort of like, what if these things were closer or more normal or more the same? Because like, I think the who was it? I think, well, this probably comes from a variety of different places, but there's a whole idea that AI is going to be like, if you create like a self-aware AI, it's going to be destructive and bad for humanity or something. That science fiction apocalypse idea of the robot apocalypse. But it really comes from an idea, and a few people have hinted at this, from the fact that we're reflecting humans onto it, right? That's I think where our like brains can't really handle the fact that, oh, this thing is essentially not meat human. Right? And that's a weird thing for a lot of people. But when you boil down what humans are, it may not be super complicated in a biological or scientific perspective. But I think the thing that really dissociates people is that human experience, right? What is the experience, and what is the reason why? Like, we make robots for specific applications for specific reasons, and that experience that we have with them also changes that dynamic, right? It's like, I don't know, you've probably met a few people that probably have certain levels of superstition. I know I have my own levels of superstition every now and then, where
Or I mean, just look at the Russian space program, how they have to stop and pee on the tire on the way to the launch pad.
exactly, right? Everyone has like that quasi tangible thing. Like, you might see someone that like think of like someone that goes in, plays a lot of football or something, and they always like wear like a similar garment every single time for a very specific reason because it has that tactile, it has some sort of motion or some sort of meaning attributed to it. And that really represents a relationship with an inanimate object that doesn't necessarily have meaning. And I think that's very, very important in terms of that, you know, the relationship of this is a little bit weird or very close to human, but not human. We need to like kind of associate some sort of meaning or certain, I guess, emotions to this inanimate object to really kind of connect with it. And I think that, honestly, I think food is really representative of that. Like, if you really think about food after it's been cooked and stuff, like, even if these are all things that are effectively alive, but once you cook it into something, it becomes close to an inanimate object. But you still have an amazingly close relationship to it, right? Like, I'm originally from New York, love bagels. Like I can have an immediate emotional increase, like I feel much happier than I was by just eating a bagel with some cream cheese because it just has like this emotional like I don't know connection with me where I'm like, yeah, this just makes me feel instantly better.
And I mean, that's kind of interesting thing. Like people don't really like food or a particular food. What they like is familiarity and kind of. So all these kind of new food companies, maybe they should have started out with baby food and just kind of followed that generation on.
Honestly, like that's not a bad way to do it because like I don't know if you've tried some baby food before. I have had the unfortunate like nature of doing so. Not a fan. It's not that great. It's like this is why are we feeding this to anyone, including babies? But yeah, no, I think it is that familiarity aspect of it. Like one of the things that was a really interesting conversation I was having with my co-founder and a few other people was like, it's as someone who like is used to eating a lot of spicy food, right? I use a lot of spices in my cooking and stuff. I'm That's one of the things that I would want for certain if I'm ever in space, right? It's like one of those things that seems superfluous, but like it would be a huge motivating factor for me and for other like groups of people in the world that like definitely enjoy that type of food. That would be like their norm, and that would be like one of the problems that they would absolutely want to solve. I think that's really interesting. It's like we're going to bring what we really want, whatever's close to us when we go up there. That like different problems for different peoples.
Yeah, I always think back to kind of Christopher Columbus and trying to find a shorter route to India to get spices, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you got to imagine, um, in the age of not having refrigerators, uh,
Yeah.
either you are butchering animals every single day, or you better have a lot of spices to make it edible.
Exactly. Or really to keep it for a long period of time, right? Salt is the original thing, but I know that from some minor research, capsaicin, the usual active compound in most chili peppers, that is actually antimicrobial as well. So it can actually keep things longer as well. So I think that's a really interesting idea. It's like, we may not necessarily evolve to a point where we need to like go back and not truly have refrigeration of any kind, but it's a lot of energy if you really think about what you're doing, and like trying to be efficient with your energy usage is going to be a very, very important thing. And maybe these solutions from the past are kind of the direction we need to go.
Well, and just from going to space standpoint, I mean, you're sending astronauts on a 2-year mission, 3-year, maybe longer mission to Mars and back.
Yeah,
You need to have enough food when you take off for them for the
exactly.
entire mission, and you,
Exactly.
you have to expect, just because you lost power for a couple of hours or days for your refrigerator, you don't want all the food to go bad.
Exactly. So you need to have some not only backup systems, but you need to have some sort of alternative method of doing stuff. I mean, I think algae is one of those interesting things for like what we do for that aspect is like, okay, you can grow something, but also having the alternatives of, what if you're not growing something or just storing something and you need to keep it for longer? How do you do that? And then the additional aspect of like, okay, you're keeping something for long, or you have this algae, but now you even need it, like you need to make it taste good so that you don't get like just bored or tired or really depressed when you're eating, just some food.
Definitely. Um, well, I I guess did you find out? How did you find out that NASA is planning to send people to the moon in 2024?
So I kind of, well, I follow along with a lot of the NASA stuff and a lot of different space things. So for me, I kind of tend to stay informed just as I get like articles or different things kind of sent my way. I'm very, very interested just in general because uh, honestly, I think that that's the direction we need to do for like more space exploration. I think that launching from the Earth makes a lot of sense right now, but eventually we should just be launching from the moon because A, it's closer, you need less energy because less gravity, and I think that that's just the mode or it just seems like the more energy efficient way to go. So I'm very excited for a moon base because I think that that is the next big step for doing anything space related for humans as a species, or really just learning more about the universe at large. Or here's hoping eventually someone's stepping on Venus for the first time.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't think anybody would be upset if we try to terraform Venus.
Oh, I'm so interested in that. Like I look at the Venusian atmosphere and I'm just like, I get it. I understand the reason people want to go to Mars, but A, it's closer. And if you look at all that stuff in the atmosphere and you look at how organisms on Earth kind of deal with stuff, that's stuff that's usable, right? If you're using biology as your technology for terraforming or technology for transforming a location, that's usable compounds, that's usable material that biology could definitely utilize for, creating potentially livable space.
I wonder if this latest kind of shock about phosphine being in the atmosphere of Venus might actually make some people a little hesitant about trying to terraform Venus.
There's definitely that scientific component, like we want to definitely research and look into this. And I definitely have a deep respect for that. I think that that's really cool. But I do think that we'd be doing disservice to ourselves if we're not only researching ways to terraform something like Venus. Like, like we should be on Earth at least doing the research, being like, here's how we could do this and here's how we couldn't, and then leave it up to either, our current generation or the future generation to make that decision whenever it seems valid.
And would it surprise you that like 80% of the non-space people I talk to don't know we're planning to send people to the moon?
It's not that surprising. I think there's been a huge drop off, over the past few decades on people's interest in space. It's kind of like has been, I think, reserved over the past decade with people that are really, really into it. Like I myself have like talked about. I get into some weird conversations with some friends because we get deep and introspectual sometimes. So I thought about like, how would be, what are the ways I would like to die? And one of my ideal deaths is actually dying on the moon. I think that'd be like incredibly epic. It'd be like, yeah, we made it, we're back, right? But it's one of those things where a lot of people haven't been really thinking about it because it hasn't been a core part of our lives. I think the evolution of technology that SpaceX has brought, the reinvigorated interest of like both like China and NASA and big major powers really looking at space, not only for the sake of like its space, but also the economics of resources and getting stuff and utilizing all those things for growing, our quote unquote finite economy. I think that is going to really introduce a lot of interest over the next decade. I think by 2030 we're going to have another generation of people that will be looking at space and seeing it as a viable opportunity and being a huge huge interest, a huge starting line for whatever comes next for people.
It's interesting to say the next decade. I often like to say that I feel like the 2020s are going to be the space exploration what the 1990s were to the internet. I mean, you probably have an easier time explaining to somebody orbital mechanics in 1990 than email or the web or anything like that. And then by 2000, everybody just accepts it as commonplace. And, likewise now kind of humans going into space, but we already have two private missions on the books. I mean, we got the Inspiration 4 mission and then the Axiom Space mission. And
It's all about tangibility. That's what I think. And like the reason the drop off has happened is that lack of tangibility. It's like when we were doing the space missions and doing trying to get to the moon and stuff. there was a real sense of like, eventually I could make it to the moon, right? A regular person could look at this and be like, I could make it there at some point. Technology has been, increasing fast enough that it's possible that someone will eventually make it, and just like a private citizen. And I think that the lack thereof over the past few decades is probably where that drop off has happened. But now we're really seeing the private side of things, where they're incentivized to eventually get to a point where someone like me or someone like you could literally just book a ticket, go to the moon for a weekend, and come back. That's kind of incredible, and that's very tangible. And really will invigorate people to be like, there are possibilities here that I never thought were possible over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I get the sense when talking to people that who are down about the space program, or like, why are we spending all that money? When you get to the question of, would you go to space if it was safe and affordable? Like, yeah, sure. It's like, it's all about, um, kind of like the exclusivity of it turns
Yeah.
people off.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where right now not everyone has that accessibility. But, as we've seen with a lot of different technologies, especially in a private hands where they're incentivized to like get as many people as possible, that price will get driven down. It will happen. Will it happen like in the next decade for everyone to have accessibility? I don't know. But I do think eventually it will happen, and going to the moon will just be a commonplace thing. Trying to get to Mars or trying to get to Venus will just be like, it's going to be the next step. It's like, oh, that's not going to be hard. It's just what we're doing. Like that. It's just the process by which we're going to grow our space footprint. And then getting to like something like the next solar system is going to be the real big goal. And that's kind of what I'm excited for, is that thought process of like, really thinking multi light years and just being like, hey, we are no longer just stuck to this sun. And that possibility, it's just very exciting.
I know we're right at the time. Did you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, please go ahead. If there's any questions I can answer, or any feedback, or things I can share on or share my thoughts on, I would love to.
So just a question about us making it to the next star. Um, the technology that looks like we have the firmest grasp on would be a generation ship, where
Yep.
you would kind of have people live multiple generations in a ship, and then their children's 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 children would arrive in the next star system.
Mhm.
That all sounds great if you're the people leaving Earth and you made that choice. But I have yet to see people who have been bounded by previous generations go, yeah, thank you so much for doing that to me.
It is definitely it's an interesting moral quandary for sure. Like, I think that that's a really interesting question to ask ourselves. Really, like, you have to definitely commit to like doing something like that. But I actually also think it's reflective of that same experience of the old world versus the new world type of situation, right? It's like there were plenty of people that were kind of disenfranchised, that were just like, hey, maybe there's more opportunity coming to what became the United States or something like that. And there was in certain contexts. Now, there were also bad things that happened out of that. Like, let's not completely shy away from that truth. But I think it's one of those things where I was kind of talking to another friend of mine about a week ago about this, was that we don't live in silos. No individual truly lives in a silo. No matter who you are or where you have been, you're always influenced by the world around you, including what the prior generation has already done. The best that any individual can do is make the decision that makes the most sense to them in that one moment in time. And it is kind of shitty that your children will have to take upon the consequences of that decision. But the truth of that fact is, even if even if you choose not to make that decision, there are consequences related to that decision, to that not making that decision, and that same consequence is still something that your children will have to bear, right? It's like actually, here's probably the really interesting thing. Your parents decide something kind of really shitty that you have to deal with when you get older. I think most people kind of generally understand that, because I think it's a pretty common theme, even if it's small or big. It's a pretty common theme among most families, I think. But think about it this way. Um, think about your father or your mother, like, deciding they could have made an investment in the early 90s, or something like that, and not investing in Apple, right? They were still well off. They were still fine. Nothing bad happened, but they didn't make the decision to be ultra rich. Now, your life is still probably still okay, but there was still a quote unquote consequence of that decision or that non-decision in this case. So I think that that's kind of the big thing. It's like we don't know what the future generation will truly consider to be the better version or the better consequence of the decisions that we make, and we will not know that. And sometimes we just kind of have to rip the band-aid off and just be like, this just needs to happen.
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. But the other thing is, uh, the knowledge of one generation is not fully passed on to the
Yeah,
next generation. And you know the um the first generation that's born in that ship will probably believe their parents when they say we used to live on a planet and we had atmosphere and the world's much bigger than the ship. But you got to imagine, like, 4 or 5 generations into this, people come to believe the ship is the entire universe.
yeah, yeah. That's an incredibly interesting concept. For me, it's interesting on the basis of like looking at history and looking at, how do myths get born, right? How do you create a myth? And I think that in that specific context, the most interesting myth is the passing of the Earth to the new planet, right? If you have a planet in mind, you're like, that's where we're going to go. We've gotten everything ready, and somehow nothing gets fucked up. Let's just say that somehow nothing gets fucked up and it gets to the next planet that we've targeted and it lands automatically, and you just like have an entire planet that now have humans on it. Like that's how is that idea going to be translated? What myths kind of come out of that? What stories come out of that? How do people define that, multi-generationally? And I think that's a really, really interesting, really incredible idea to think about. And that's I think where the responsibilities kind of lie, is that because we're leaving this, we're basically condemning, to say it in a kind of a shitty way, we're condemning at least 3 or 4 generations of individuals to not have ever lived on a planet, to never live on a planet. And that I think is the moral quandary that I think I would have the most trouble with, is like, I love the Earth. I truly believe that as much as I want to, eventually go to the moon or maybe like step on another planet if it's possible within my lifetime, um, I learned for sure in my past like 2 decades, that 2.5 decades, I guess, that I've yet to truly explore the Earth. There's still a lot the Earth has to offer, and to completely pull that away from someone is probably the biggest moral quandary for myself to like deal with, because I think that is a very, very big thing. It's like, hey, there's some really cool things that the Earth has just done, and the fact that you will never experience this ever and maybe have stories of it is kind of depressing, if I'm being honest with you.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You think about Elon's vision and priorities of creating that million-person city that's self-sufficient on Mars. And you hear Jeff Bezos talking about O'Neill cylinders and why do we need to live on planets? And we create these huge space structures that we can create whatever climates and situations we in. Um, it's kind of interesting in terms of thinking about short term versus long term. It's like in the near term, you really need the Elon Musk vision because it's going to be
Yep.
easier to build that million person city on Mars, and then that's going to create the impetus for having multiple commercial people um, doing transportation and
Yeah.
space technology. But then, that kind of lays the foundation to actually create these huge space structures, which I really see that system ship being like a set of O'Neill cylinders that have nuclear power or something, that just kind of go as like a fleet off, and maybe that keeps it dynamic, right? You have
Got it.
people switching between places, and it's like.
Yeah, I mean that's also an interesting thing where, well, human dynamics, never have been simple. At least as far as I've read history, has never been simple. And I think, is it healthy for us to keep that dynamic going artificially, or should we try to get everyone to collectivize or not? That's an interesting question, because I think that it is within human nature to, kind of find an in group and an out group. That doesn't always need to end in some really terrible things, but it usually has. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think like having a healthy maintenance of that, such that there is harmony, is definitely a very important step. So maybe having fleets to kind of represent that, and then also kind of representing that, hey, there is life or things beyond just this one ship, is I think very, very important, because like that is definitely something that will be lost, in a single ship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might have, the tropical ship and the ocean ship and the, um, the desert ship.
Just a whole lot of VR holograms everywhere.
You can have that too.
Yeah,
Well, I really appreciate your time. Is
yeah,
there
yeah, of
anything else
course.
that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
There wasn't anything else of like great importance or anything. The only thing I'll probably leave everyone with is like, hey, all y'all, for when we do get onto the moon, I really want us to build a railgun on the moon, because I think that's going to be the best way to get anything off moon, and I think that's going to be great. So any engineers out there that want to think about that, that's a free idea for you out there, because like I think that would be incredible.
I agree. Oh, and one thing I wanted to ask you about is, did you sign up for Inspiration 4?
I have not. I have not. And there's a few reasons for that. My personal reason is that I'm in that modality where like there's a few things that I kind of want to focus on first before I make it out there. And I will focus on those things first. And I'm hoping that those things will help in the long term for like creating any sort of civilization or any sort of place. But eventually I will make it out to space, because I think that that is the goal. There's plenty of time that even if I have to build a rocket myself, that's going to take me 50 years, I'll make it to the moon.
Well, good deal. I like your certainty. And, believing it happen is what's going to make it happen.
Absolutely, because that's always the starting point.
Well, okay. Thank you so much. You have a good rest of your day.
Yep. Thanks, Nathan. Have a good
Bye
one.
bye.